The morning was still and gray when a man carrying a baby approached the gate of St. Mary's Orphanage, a quiet brick building on the outskirts of a small Texas town. He looked around nervously, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might be following him. The baby, wrapped in a faded pink blanket, stirred lightly in his arms. "Please, take care of her," he whispered, as he handed the infant to the startled nun who opened the door. "Her name is Laura." Before the woman could ask a single question, he turned and disappeared into the fog, leaving nothing but the faint sound of footsteps fading into the distance. That was 1983. Laura would never know who that man really was, or why he had left her there, until 42 years later. Inside the orphanage, life was cold but structured. Laura grew up surrounded by children who shared similar stories of abandonment. Some were adopted quickly, others waited for years. Laura waited the longest. Her only clue to her past was a silver pendant she'd been found wearing, engraved with the initials M.W. Every night, before she went to sleep, she would hold the pendant tightly and whisper, "Who are you, M.W.?" Years passed. Families came and went, but no one ever chose Laura. When she was 7, a couple from Houston took her in as a foster child. They were kind, but distant. Her foster father worked long hours, and her foster mother seemed constantly overwhelmed. Laura learned early how to take care of herself. She got good at pretending she was fine, pretending she didn't care that no one ever came looking for her. At school, she was quiet but observant. Teachers described her as bright, though withdrawn. She loved stories, especially those about lost princesses and secret families. "Maybe that's me," she used to think. "Maybe someone out there is still looking for me." But as she grew older, those fantasies faded. Reality took over. By the time she turned 18, Laura had aged out of the system. She left Houston with 2 suitcases, a worn-out backpack, and the pendant that never left her neck. She tried to build a normal life, college, work, relationships, but the emptiness of not knowing her origins followed her everywhere. When people asked about her family, she would change the subject. "I grew up in foster care," she'd say, forcing a smile. But deep down she wondered, why was I left? Who made that choice for me? One rainy night in her mid-30s, she found herself sitting alone in her small apartment, scrolling through old photographs of the orphanage she'd recently visited. Something inside her cracked open. She whispered again, "M.W., if you're out there, I need to know why." The pendant, the only link to her past, seemed to gleam faintly under the lamplight, as if daring her to search for the truth she had buried for so long. What Laura didn't know was that the man who had left her on that cold morning decades ago had been much closer to her story than she ever imagined, and that his decision had changed not only her fate, but her entire family's. But that revelation was still waiting to be uncovered. If you were in Laura's place, would you want to uncover the truth, even if it could destroy everything you believed about your past? Tell us in the comments, and stay tuned for the next part of Laura's incredible journey. Laura's 20s passed in a blur of survival. She moved from job to job, waitressing, cleaning, working in retail, always keeping her past tucked away like a wound that hadn't healed. No matter where she went, the question followed her: why was I abandoned? By the time she turned 30, Laura had built a modest life for herself in Austin. She worked at a local library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and quiet whispers. Books were her safest escape. They never lied, never left. But some nights when the library lights dimmed and silence settled, she would trace her fingers over the pendant's initials and imagine a man's face. "M.W." She'd whisper, "Are you my father? Or someone else?" Then came a letter that changed everything. One afternoon, while sorting mail at work, Laura received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an old, faded picture of 2 young men standing beside a car. On the back, written in trembling handwriting, were the words, "Your father's best friend, Michael. Find him." Laura's heart pounded. She had never told anyone about the initials M.W. Whoever sent that letter knew something. But who? That night she couldn't sleep. She searched for Michael W. in every database she could find, but there were hundreds of results. Still, something about the handwriting haunted her. familiar yet unreachable, like a memory trapped behind fog. Days turned into weeks. Life went on, but the letter stayed in her mind. One evening, while having coffee with her best friend Emily, Laura confessed the story she had hidden for years: the orphanage, the pendant, the letter, the mysterious initials. Emily listened in silence, then leaned forward. "Laura, have you ever done a DNA test?" Laura laughed softly. "You mean those genealogy kits?" "No. I don't even know where to start." Emily smiled. "Then that's exactly where you should start." It sounded simple enough. A small box arrived in the mail a week later. Laura followed the instructions, mailed back the sample, and forgot about it. But when the results arrived a month later, her entire world tilted. The screen displayed a list of DNA matches. Dozens of names appeared, but one stood out: Daniel W., predicted relationship, half-brother. Laura froze. Half-brother? Her mind raced. Could it be a mistake? She clicked on Daniel's profile, his hometown, Dallas, Texas, his father's name, Michael Warren, the initials, M.W. Her stomach dropped. For days, Laura couldn't breathe properly. Every piece of her past seemed to shift into a new and terrifying shape. She reached out to Daniel with a cautious message. "Hi, I think we might be related. My name is Laura. I was adopted from an orphanage in Texas in 1983. Do you know anyone named Michael Warren?" Hours passed with no reply. Then her phone buzzed. "Hi, Laura. Yes. Michael Warren was my father. He passed away 3 years ago. But there's something you should know." Laura stared at the message, her hands trembling. Something inside her told her that the story she had believed her entire life, the one about being abandoned by her parents, was about to unravel completely. That night, as she looked at the pendant again, for the first time she felt fear. Not of being alone, but of knowing. Because sometimes the truth is far more painful than the lie. But Laura had already stepped onto a path that could not be reversed. What was the secret Daniel knew about his father? And what did it have to do with Laura's disappearance 42 years ago? Daniel's reply came 2 days later, and every word felt like a door opening into a world Laura had never known existed. "My father, Michael Warren, used to talk about a girl he couldn't save," Daniel wrote. "He said it was the biggest mistake of his life. He never told us her name, but he kept a photo of a baby girl in a drawer. I think that was you." Laura read the message again and again, her pulse racing. A man who couldn't save her? But the man who dropped her off at the orphanage was Michael Warren. How could he claim regret if he had been the one to abandon her? She asked Daniel for more details, and he agreed to meet her in person. They chose a cafe halfway between Austin and Dallas, a quiet place where strangers often came together with stories too heavy for phone calls. When she arrived, Daniel stood up immediately. He looked to be in his mid-40s, kind eyes, a little uncertain. As soon as he saw her, his expression softened. "You look like my father," he said quietly. Laura felt her throat tighten. "Then that means—" He nodded. "Yes, you're my sister." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe around them seemed to fade away. It was as if the world had paused, waiting for Laura to take her first real breath of truth. Daniel then placed an old leather wallet on the table. Inside were faded photos. One of a baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. "Dad kept this all his life," he said. "He told my mom it was a distant cousin's child, but she never believed him." Laura's hands shook as she touched the photo. It was her. Tears welled in her eyes. "But if he was my father's best friend, why would he take me away? Why leave me in an orphanage?" Daniel exhaled. "That's the part I don't fully understand. But my mother told me once that Dad and your father had a falling out. Something about betrayal, about family. He said he was protecting someone, but he never said who. Protecting someone." The words rang in Laura's ears like a riddle. Later that night, back home, she couldn't sleep. She searched for any record of Michael Warren and Robert Hill, the man Daniel confirmed was her biological father's name. What she found sent shivers down her spine. Old newspaper clippings from 1983 mentioned both men, business partners in a construction company. A scandal had erupted around the same time she was born. One article suggested that Michael Warren had been accused of embezzling money and framing his partner, Robert Hill. The company collapsed. Robert disappeared from public life soon after. Laura's mind swirled. Could Michael's decision to abandon her have been part of some twisted act of revenge? The next morning, she called Daniel again. "I need to see anything else your father left behind. Letters, notes, anything." He hesitated, then agreed. "There is a box in the attic. I never opened it. Maybe it's time we do." That weekend, Laura drove to Dallas. The house was quiet, the air heavy with nostalgia. In the attic, dust motes floated in the sunlight as Daniel pulled out a wooden box marked "Private." Inside were letters, some addressed to Robert, others unsent. One, dated 1983, read, "I did what I had to do. You'll never forgive me, but I couldn't let her grow up in that chaos. She deserves peace even if she hates me for it." Laura's breath caught. The handwriting was the same as the one from the anonymous letter she'd received months earlier. Michael hadn't been just a villain or a hero. He had done something terrible for reasons she couldn't yet understand. But one line at the bottom of that letter froze her completely. "Tell her. Her father never stopped looking for her." The pendant on Laura's chest felt suddenly heavy. Her father was alive, somewhere, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to find him. What if Laura's real father had been searching all these years, and the truth about her disappearance was far darker than anyone knew? The drive to uncover the truth consumed Laura. Every spare moment, every breath seemed to revolve around one question. Why had Michael Warren taken her from her father? And what was he protecting her from? After days of searching, Daniel called her again. "You need to see something," he said. "I found another letter in the box. It's from your father." When Laura arrived at Daniel's house, he handed her a yellowed envelope with trembling hands. The name, Laura Hill, was written on the front in a careful, almost loving script. Inside there was a single sheet of paper, creased, faded, but still legible. "My dearest Laura, if you ever read this, it means you found your way back to the truth. I never stopped looking for you. Michael told me you were gone, that you had died. For years I believed him. I trusted him like a brother. I couldn't imagine he would ever lie to me. But when I began to suspect the truth, it was too late. He vanished. And so did you. If I could take back that time, I would. I hope one day you can forgive him. And me. Love, Dad." Laura stared at the letter through a blur of tears. The room spun. Michael had told her father she was dead. He hadn't abandoned her to protect her. He had stolen her. Daniel looked at her, pale and shaken. "I don't think my father was evil, Laura," he said softly. "But I think he was desperate." Laura nodded, though her heart was pounding. Desperate for what? That question haunted her as she began piecing together the puzzle. She visited the small town where she'd been left as a baby, searching through public archives. Eventually, she found what she didn't even know she was looking for: a record from 1983 listing a custody dispute involving Robert Hill and Michael Warren. But the case had been sealed. No details were made public. A local reporter, an elderly woman who remembered the scandal, offered a clue. Back then, everyone whispered that Michael's wife couldn't have children. Some say she was obsessed with Robert's baby. Others said Michael wanted revenge after Robert exposed him for stealing money from the company. The air grew heavy. Laura's stomach twisted. "So, he took me to punish my father?" The reporter hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe he did it for his wife. Either way, he made sure the truth disappeared." Laura left the office trembling. All the years of loneliness, the feeling of being unwanted, it had never been about her. She wasn't abandoned. She was taken. Driving back to Dallas, tears streamed down her face. "You didn't leave me," she whispered to the empty car. "You didn't give up on me." When she returned, Daniel handed her one last envelope from the box. It was marked for Laura, if she ever finds me. Inside was a photo of Michael Warren in his later years, gray-haired, weary, but with eyes full of sorrow. On the back he had written, "I couldn't undo what I did. I thought I was saving you. I see now that I was only saving myself." Laura held the photo tightly, torn between anger and pity. He had taken everything from her, yet, in his broken way, he had loved her enough to regret it. That night, she sat under the quiet Texas sky and opened her phone. She typed Robert Hill into a search bar one more time. A hospice center appeared in Houston. Her hands trembled as she read the words, Robert Hill, 71 years old. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely breathe. He was alive, and he had never stopped searching. Laura is about to meet the father she thought she lost forever. But what will she say to a man who's been haunted by her memory for over 40 years? The air outside the hospice smelled faintly of rain and garden soil. Laura stood frozen by the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. 42 years of wondering, searching, and hurting, all leading to this single moment. Inside, a nurse led her down a quiet hallway. He's been very weak lately, the nurse said softly, but he still asks about his daughter. Every day. Laura's breath caught. He never stopped believing. She stepped into a small room where an elderly man sat by the window, sunlight falling across his weathered face. His eyes, tired, gray, but unmistakably kind, turned toward her. For a moment he simply stared, as if afraid to believe what he was seeing. Laura, he whispered, his voice trembling. She couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. Dad, it's me. Robert Hill's eyes filled instantly. He reached out with shaking hands. Laura crossed the room and fell into his arms. The years between them vanished in a single heartbeat. They held each other for a long time, the silence saying everything that words couldn't. When they finally pulled apart, Robert touched the pendant around her neck. You kept it? He said softly. Laura nodded. It was all I had of you. He smiled weakly. Michael gave that to you before he took you. He said it would keep you safe. Laura's expression darkened. He told you I was dead? Robert sighed. Yes. I believed him for years. He said there had been a car accident. I buried an empty coffin because I had nothing else to hold on to. His voice broke, and Laura's tears flowed freely. I searched for you, she said. When I found out the truth, I didn't know whether to hate him or forgive him. Robert looked at her with a gentleness that seemed to come from beyond pain. Sometimes, Laura, people make terrible choices because they think it's the only way to protect someone. I don't know what Michael told himself, but I know he loved you. He was my friend once, and I think his guilt ate him alive. They talked for hours about her life, his regrets, and the empty years they both endured. Each story stitched together a wound that had bled for decades. When the nurse returned to check on them, she found father and daughter still holding hands, smiling through tears. Before leaving, Laura asked, Why didn't you ever remarry or move on? Robert chuckled softly. Because every time I looked at another child, I saw your face. How do you move on from your heart? Laura leaned her forehead against his. You don't, she whispered. You wait. And one day, the heart comes back. Days later, Laura attended Michael Warren's grave for the first time. She placed a single white rose on the headstone. I understand now, she said quietly. You made the wrong choice, but you gave me the chance to find the truth. I forgive you. The wind rustled gently through the trees, as if carrying her words away. For the first time in her life, Laura felt free. She looked up at the sky, thinking about the long chain of events, lies, betrayals, love, and regret that had brought her here. She finally understood that her story wasn't about being abandoned. It was about being found again and again by the truth. As she walked back toward her car, she smiled through tears. The world suddenly felt lighter, fuller, alive. The truth may take a lifetime to surface, but when it does, it brings peace where there was once only pain. Family isn't defined by who never left. It's defined by who never stopped searching. Would you have forgiven Michael if you were in Laura's place? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more true emotional stories, and remember, sometimes the truth finds you when you stop running from it.